You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 197. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. What tips do I have for lawyers who have ADHD who want some help when it comes to career planning? If that's a question that you would love to hear the answer to, then you are 100% in the right place. And I'm thrilled to have you here. Welcome. I am so glad to have you. I kind of wonder what you're doing right now. I mean, for me, I'm sitting here in my home office. I'm looking out at the snowy rooftops here in Vancouver, which is quite a treat. And thinking about you, right? Whether you're listening to this episode as you're out walking, or maybe you're doing the dishes or folding laundry or driving. There are all sorts of things that you might be up to. So I hope you're doing well wherever you are. And I hope this episode really resonates with you. If you were here last week, then you will have heard the podcast episode that was all about my top 3 productivity tips for lawyers with ADHD. And I shared tips that I find resonate in particular with lawyers who have ADHD. And those tips were really focused on 3 things, really 3 micro things, as I like to think about it. Number 1 was to create a visual depiction of time, right? That can really help, especially if you have some things like time blindness, or you have a hard time estimating time or really appreciating where the different parts of your day are going to fit into the actual day itself. We talked about having habits, so creating habits that support productivity and clearing away habits that are not particularly conducive to productivity. We talked about leveraging habits that work for you to create even more habits that work for you. So that was the second thing. And then the third thing that we talked about was this idea that no matter what your systems are, you can expect that at some point they are going to fail, and that does not reflect poorly on you or even on the system itself. And so what to do when that happens so that you can bounce back a little bit quicker. So if you are interested in learning those productivity tips in more detail and you didn't listen to last week's episode, then I'd encourage you to go back to that episode and have a listen. Today is a much more macro perspective. And the reason that I want to talk about career planning, particularly for lawyers who have ADHD, is that what I've noticed in my coaching practice, which includes lawyers who have ADHD, is that there are certain themes that I've noticed among the lawyers that I've coached who have ADHD. And so I wanted to share with you some of the tips and strategies that I've used with them that they have found to be particularly effective, because these may resonate with you as well, whether you have ADHD or not. So with that, I'm going to share 3 tips. These are really designed to help you with that broader career strategy. And if you have any questions about what we talk about today, or if you'd like my help with your career planning, by all means, reach out to me. I would love to hear from you. So with that, we're going to dive in. And the first strategy that I would like to offer, if you are a lawyer who has ADHD and you're struggling a little bit in your career planning, is to take an explorer's approach to your career and to not expect to follow a linear career path. This is something that I talk to a lot of lawyers about, those with ADHD and those who don't have ADHD. What this sounds like is that you come to me and you feel like things are a little bit off kilter because you're not really sure what you want to do, right? Maybe you've been in job X for a number of years and it's just not working for you. Maybe you're at a big firm or a little firm, or you're in government or you're in some role, and it just isn't working for you and you don't know what to do next. And it feels like you should be on a certain path, right? You look at your peers, maybe your former friends from or colleagues from law school or former peers from law school. Maybe they're your current colleagues. Maybe they're other people around you, and everybody else seems to know exactly what they want to do. And they're on these paths, and those paths seem very linear to you. And for you, you're feeling like, you just don't really see it that way. And so what can happen, especially if you have ADHD, is that you may be highly creative. You may have a number of different areas where you feel really passionate and you want to pursue all of them, but you feel like you kind of have to narrow it down and pick only one of them. You might find that you look at the career paths of others, right? If you're in a law firm, you might look at the partners who are in your firm. If you're in government, you might look to the lawyers who are more senior than you are and the roles that they occupy. And you might look at all of these people around you and think, I can't see a single example of somebody whose career and life I would want to have. And so it's very unsettling because you don't see yourself as having that in the future. When you don't see that clear path ahead of you, that can create a significant amount of stress, right? That you feel like, why is everybody else on this path and I'm not on a path? And so you look to others, they seem like they're so set and everything's laid out for them. And so that can create stress for you. And then what you can end up telling yourself is that you should know, right? You should know exactly what you want to do, that you should be grateful to have the job that you have, that you worry that you are not on the right track. So here, what I would offer to you is to, again, adopt this mindset of you are an explorer, you are a creative, you are a pioneer, right? The idea that your career needs to be linear is not necessarily true. And I say this having worked with a number of lawyers whose career path is not linear, right? You have a job that takes you down a certain path, and it leads you in a direction where you learn something that you really love about yourself. So I think about a lawyer that I worked with early on in my coaching practice who was practicing as a lawyer, and she found that she tried a number of different organizations. She was in private practice, she was in government, she was in a very specific practice area. None of it was resonating with her. And so we did some work together to help her redirect her career. And what she shared with me was that she had this, we looked at the breadcrumbs, right? What was it about her previous roles that seemed to really appeal to her, right? And I actually don't know if this lawyer had ADHD. She never said if she did. But what she did share with me was that she really enjoyed the aspects of her role that had her involved in human resources, where she was dealing with people. She was helping other people with their careers, mentoring, teaching, helping others grow professionally. And what ended up happening was she identified this program that she really wanted to take. It was not a lawyer role that she ultimately went into that she wanted for herself. She wanted to take a different path, and she did that. And it wasn't linear, right? It wasn't as though the roles that she had very predictably set her up for a position in human resources. It was only in looking back that she was able to see the common threads. So for you, if you are a lawyer and you're struggling because you are feeling like you don't know what path you're on, that is okay. What we want to do is take your career and assume it's not going to be linear. An analogy that might help you is to think about a sailboat, right? When a sailboat is sailing, it is tacking from side to side, and it's never pointed truly and precisely at the thing that it's trying to get to, right? It's never going exactly toward its destination. It's going one direction, then it pivots and it turns right, it turns left, turns left, turns right. And so it's never actually going exactly in the right direction. But as long as the sailboat keeps course correcting, it will hit its destination. So here, I would invite you to think the same thing about your career. Regardless of where you're going, you don't have to be pointed exactly at that destination throughout your career path journey. You just need to be going in the right direction, roughly the right direction. So what does that look like in practice? I would invite you to notice, right? As you are in any particular role, what it is that is working for you. What are you most interested in? What are you most passionate about? Is it the subject matter that you're involved in? Is it the fact that you're working with a team that you really love working with? Do you find that you are driven and motivated by particular injustices? Or are you noticing that certain environments are more exciting to you than others? So you want to notice. If you've had more than one job, you might look at your pattern, right? What have you really enjoyed doing? Is it drafting that really lights you up? Is it being on your feet in court that really lights you up? Is it working with individuals versus working with corporations that really excites you? So all you're doing here is you are noticing as you go through your careers, going through your different jobs, what it is that you love about each job. And then you're going to pivot, right? You're going to use what you know in order to pivot into your next role. And as you continue on, right, you are going to be tacking, you're going to be pivoting always in the direction of something that is unique, right? If we go back to that idea that the thing that you ultimately do may not yet exist. And the way for you to get there is to continue to lean into your strengths. So you're spotting patterns, you're making connections. So if you think about the ADHD brain, it's often said that your ability to spot connections, to see patterns, to think creatively is more than the average person. And so you may leverage that strength when it comes to your own career planning. You might also find that you are more intrigued by novelty, by taking risks, by exploring things that haven't yet been done before. And so again, you might take that same approach when it comes to crafting your career path, right? The role that you end up having, right? If you think about, looking around your firm, looking around your place of employment and not seeing the role that you want, it may be that you're the one who's going to create it, right? It might be that you create a role within another organization, one that you may already be in. It may be that you start your own organization, you start your own firm, or you start your own practice in some other discipline. So that's what you're thinking about. You're thinking about how you're going to apply your creativity to create something that really resonates with you. And the reason this is going to work is that you get to follow your interests, right? You're really building your career path based on things that are of interest to you. You will build your skills along the way, right? If you think about climbing a mountain, for example, you can climb, and then you get to the top of the mountain and you realize, standing at the peak, that there is a whole range of mountains behind that first mountain. And now you've actually got the ability to see those other mountains. And so you can go to the next mountain and start climbing that one. So same is true here with your career, right? You're building at each level of your career. You're always going to be building. And every time you reach a new level of success, you reach a new level of developing a certain skill set, you then have more opportunities that open up to you. And so here you're doing that. You're building your skills in a particular direction, and that is going to lead to your next opportunity. Another reason why this is really great, especially if you find that you are bored easily, is that if you've got this idea of just leaning into your strengths and building on the things that are of interest to you, then you continue to remain engaged in your work, right? There's that challenge, there's that novelty. You keep building towards something. You may not know exactly what it looks like, but you've got a gut sense of what that is going to be. And quite often, if you've got that drive, right? Again, thinking of the ADHD brain and the ability to hyper-focus, right? If you're so interested in a topic and you're able to just hyper-focus and be so productive and become the expert in that thing, now you've got an advantage over everybody else who doesn't have that. And I think that can be highly advantageous, especially in the type of economy that we have today where so many things are changing. You've got that ability to hyper-focus, to adapt, to think creatively. And so we want to use those skills, not just in the actual execution of your work, but also in the way that you approach your career, right? So you're innovating your own role. Now, a couple of ideas to set yourself up for success when you're taking this approach is to always focus on growth, right? I would encourage you to always think about how you are going to enhance your own skills, right? How do you want to be most marketable? And so that's going to require that you develop your skills, right? That might be your legal skills, your leadership skills, your practice management skills. There's all these skills that you're going to develop along the way. It means developing your relationships intentionally. Relationships really, we should not underestimate them. I think that is something that unfortunately a lot of lawyers fall, I don't want to say victim to, but the job itself can be so demanding that relationships are sometimes one of the things that we don't focus on because we've got so many other things that we need to prioritize. What I would encourage you to do is to make sure that you don't neglect your relationships, that you cultivate the ones that feel really good to you, right? Those people in your life that are your mentors, your colleagues, people that you feel are kindred spirits. Maintain and build those relationships because over time, you never know where those relationships are going to lead you, including in your career path. And then focus in on the impact, right? What are the things that you do that you feel really good about doing at work, where you feel like you're making a difference, where you feel that sense of connection and meaning and engagement from your work, right? And as long as you're doing these things, then you're going to pull yourself in the right direction. And by the right direction, I mean the direction that's going to allow you to continue to build your career in a very unique way based on your strengths, based on where you want to go. And then finally, I would also encourage you to take the opportunities that generate the most excitement for you. So you might find sometimes you're at a crossroads in your career where you can take a path that feels like the path that you should take, right? Maybe it's a job that carries a lot of prestige, or it's a job that you think you've always wanted, but you're not really feeling a connection to it, right? And then there's another opportunity for you that maybe it doesn't have the same level of prestige. Maybe there's something about that role that is a little bit iffy, right? Maybe it's a contract position that you would be filling in for as opposed to a full-on job that has no end date attached to it. And so in those moments, I would encourage you to give a lot of thought to which of those options is most true for you, right? You might want it to be the opportunity that carries the prestige, that carries the, it aligns with where you think you should want to go. But you might find that it's actually that other role that really lights you up, and to give yourself the gift of exploring opportunities that may be like that, because you never know where they're going to lead you. And again, you're looking at your skill set over time. You're looking at your career path as this non-linear adventure, and where you end up may be really impacted by the choices that you make in those forks in the road. So that is tip number one. When it comes to career strategy, you have got this beautiful ability to do so many different things. You may have multiple different interests. You could see your career going in any number of different ways, and you would be equally happy. So figure out, what are the common threads? What are the things that really light you up? And how do you navigate job to job, right? Sort of one position to the next position, in a way where you're following your interests, you're leaning into your strengths, and you're growing the skill set that you most want to continue to cultivate over the course of your career. Now, the second tip that I have for you is a way of making the first tip a little bit more actionable. So in coaching relationships that I've had, including with lawyers who have ADHD, one of the things that I have found to be really effective is using a mind map to externalize your ideas. Now, if you have never heard of a mind map, or you've heard of it, but you don't exactly know what it means, it's really just a way of taking what is going on inside of your brain and putting it on a piece of paper. So if you are highly creative and you've got lots of ideas and you're thinking, there's so many different directions that I could go in, you might find that you've got these ideas that are swirling around in your head. You might find that you're kind of lost, you're feeling stuck, you might feel a bit overwhelmed, you might be confused, you might feel like you are completely lacking clarity. And that may be because all of these ideas are floating around inside your mind, and it's really hard for you to make them actionable, right? So I mentioned that last week's podcast episode was all about some of the time management productivity strategies that I offer to lawyers, and particularly those with ADHD. One of them being to create a visual of time, right? Have a calendar out with the 24 hours in a day, and then which tasks go in which hours of the day, right? We want to make it really tactile, because that will bring reality to time, right? Time is this thing, it's so abstract. How do we actually kind of pin it down? And the same can be true about these ideas that you have in terms of your career, right? You've got these different interests, you've got these different relationships, you've got these different ideas about what you think can work. And as long as it's floating inside your head, it's really difficult to really focus in on any single one of them, or to see the relationships that they might have with each other. So a beautiful way to give yourself the gift of really experiencing your own genius is to create a mind map. And the mind map is simply taking that information and putting it somewhere tactile. Now, you can use a piece of regular paper and write out your ideas, right? You can start categorizing. You can use a drawing, right? You can start drawing pictures about what it might look like. You can use sticky notes. I had one client that I worked with. She was one of the very first coaching clients I ever had. She had ADHD. She was not a lawyer. And she was somebody who was struggling in her career. She was trying to figure out what to do next. And so I asked her to do a mind map. And we were working in person back in those days. And so now I do most of my coaching virtually. And from one week to the next, she came back to me. And what she produced was this gorgeous, gorgeous mind map. It was basically sticky notes, all color coded, which were organized in terms of different themes and topics. And it was beautiful. I've worked with other lawyers who have ADHD who have created mind maps that were more of a drawing, right? Where they've got almost like clouds with different ideas in them. And then sort of lines shooting out of the clouds with different ideas, almost like spokes and ideas. Sometimes the mind map is in a table, right? Organized in terms of different categories. If you go onto Google and type in mind map and click on images, you'll see different images of what a mind map can look like. So there's no one set way to create a mind map. But what these all have in common is that you're taking all of the ideas from inside your head and then you're putting them somewhere where you can see it, right? That visual is really, really key. Because once you can see it, then you can start to organize it, right? You can start to organize the different topics that you'll have. You can start to then see what the different relationships might be. So I did this exercise for myself years ago. And what was so fascinating was I was looking at all these different entities that I was really interested in, right? I was really interested in legal education for lawyers. I was interested in public legal education. I was interested in my own education. So I saw that as a cluster of themes. I was really interested in the work that counselors were doing with lawyers, different organizations that supported lawyers and their mental health. There was coaching, there was writing. There were all these different pockets that were interesting. If I think now in terms of how my practice has evolved, I see that there's clusters around time management. That's an area that I absolutely love working with lawyers in. Confidence, particularly for women lawyers, is another area that I have developed a number of resources that I've done a lot of work in. ADHD with lawyers. ADHD is something that from the beginning of my coaching practice actually really found me in terms of my personal life, my professional life. It's an area where I've done additional coach training, where I've done a ton of individual research. So if you have ADHD or you're interested in learning more about ADHD, there are some resources like Attitude Magazine, ADDITUDE, Attitude Magazine, which has incredible resources. You can sign up for their newsletter. They will send you brilliant insights every week. They also have a podcast series, which is brilliant. It is a podcast series that is based on webinars that they've provided on all topics related to ADHD. So, this is an area for me where when I do my own mind map, I see that there are all these different pockets, these different areas where I'm really interested. And what I'm doing is finding ways to bring these to life in my coaching practice. So for example, when it comes to women and helping support them develop their confidence, I've created a 6-month program. It's a group program for women lawyers. If I think about some of the work that I've done on the podcast, for example, there's a whole series of episodes about time management. I'll link to it in the show notes. I've got a whole roadmap that talks about all the different time management episodes. There's, I think, about 30 of them now on the podcast. And so I invite you to do this for yourself, right? If you look at the work that you do, if you look at the substantive work that you do, the relationships that you have, the things that you really love doing, when you put those all down on a sheet of paper, whether it's electronic, right? It's a digital document and you're creating it that way, or if you've got those sticky notes and you're writing them all on sticky notes and then you're moving those sticky notes around, you've got drawings that create a visual of what it is that you're trying to create. You start to see what it is that you really love. You start to see the connections between the two. And then from there, you can use that information to build, right? So going back to that idea of building your non-linear career, that might be a really great tool for you, especially if you're at a transition point, right? What are the things that you love? Where do you see your career going? What are some of the relationships you already have? What are some of the organizations you might want to work for? And you can use your mind map to help you set up next steps. Another really neat thing about a mind map is that when you hold on to it, then you get to go back to it. So what's really neat is when you create something like that, and then 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road, you revisit your mind map, you might be really astonished to see the areas that you've gone even deeper into, right? Those topic areas that were just really juicy for you, that you felt really passionate about, areas where you really cultivated your interests. And then you might also notice that there are things that you're not all that interested anymore. You'll see how those have kind of faded out. And even over time, right? Some of those elements that you describe in your mind map, they might fade for a few years, and then somehow you get brought back over to them. So that's a really great exercise, the mind map exercise. So what do you need to do there? Well, basically you are creating a visual, right? You want something where you've got a single place where you've got all your ideas. You can draw the connections, you can see the patterns, you can decide what you want most in the next phase of your career. And how you do that, like I said, it could be pen and paper, it could be a Word document, it could be sticky notes. The important thing there is that you just want to make it yours. So far, we've got 2 tips for career strategies for lawyers with ADHD. These are equally applicable to lawyers who do not have ADHD. But again, I have found that these have been really effective for the lawyers that I've worked with who do have ADHD. And the third is to follow your gut. Now, again, this really does speak to, I would say, pretty much all of us. I think we should be listening to our gut. I think we should be following our own instincts when it comes to developing our career path, where it is we want to go. But what you might find is that you experience self-doubt, right? You may have a lack of self-trust. This is also something that can come up with lawyers and others who have ADHD. Sometimes there's this lack of self-trust that stems from having challenges with your executive functioning skills where you're not quite able to follow through on things that you want to do, right? You have the idea of what you want to create, or you have the plan of how you want to spend your week, but then there's a disconnect between what you have in mind for yourself of what you want to do and then what you actually do. And so that can kind of undermine that relationship that you have with yourself. It can undermine that sense of self-trust. Other reasons that you may doubt yourself is statistically, people who have ADHD are often criticized a lot more frequently as young people and children than people who don't have ADHD. And so you may feel like you've been so criticized by authority figures in your life, whether it was your parents or teachers or professors or whoever, employers. And so you feel like you're doing things wrong. And so I would say that for someone who has that experience, it can be harder to trust your gut because you may be telling yourself, well, I can't trust myself, right? I've learned not to trust myself. So that's why I think it's so important that when you are making decisions for your career, that you learn how to listen to yourself and to follow that voice inside of your head, because it is the one that's going to lead you to the right direction. I've got a podcast episode I've recorded previously about your inner mentor. I also have one about your inner critic. And if those are ideas that resonate with you, then I encourage you to go back and listen to them. In particular, when it comes to that inner mentor, you have so much wisdom inside of you already. And on some level, you know what you are meant to do, right? You may have a really strong sense of purpose, right? You might not know exactly what vehicle you will use to live out that purpose, but you do know when you're working in alignment with what you feel called to do. So I would love for you to be able to connect with that part of yourself when it comes to making decisions about your career. So what I think is important here is when you are making a decision, and if you're in an existing role and you feel like you're not happy in your role, there are 2 steps to your transition. The first step is to look at the nature of your practice. Now, for lawyers in particular, especially if you're working in a highly structured environment, whether it's a law firm or maybe it's a government entity or it's some place of employment where there's a lot of structure required, or maybe there's no structure at all, because that could also create some issues. But here, what I would encourage you to look at is before you move out of your current role, if you're unhappy, I'd encourage you to look at what is actually happening in your practice. Because if you are struggling with time and or practice management, right? If your actual day-to-day is really unpleasant because you're lacking systems and structures to feel on top of your work, then you may think that you don't like your job, but actually it's the way that you're executing your job that is the problem. So what I'd invite you to do first is to go to the systems, go to your actual time and practice management and clean that up if you need to, right? And I mentioned there's last week's podcast episode that goes all into some ideas of productivity. There's the whole podcast roadmap series that talks about time management for lawyers. So you can use those resources to help you identify what some of the challenges might be and to start to fix them. You can work with a coach to help you with that. You can work with me. You can work with other coaches. There are some incredible coaches out there who can support you with that. And you just want to clear that up. And it might be that it's not just the way that you're structuring your calendar that's getting in your way. It could be people-pleasing tendencies, right? If you have a really hard time setting boundaries, and so you find that you're working around the clock, that you're constantly feeling anxious about whether or not people are happy with you, that you're working on projects that are really not aligned with your long-term goals, but you don't want to say no to them. So we want to get a handle on those things first, number one, so that you can actually decide whether you would like your job if it was different. And also number two, because if and when you decide to make a move, you don't want to carry those habits and practices with you and then end up in a role and where you're recreating the same problems that you have currently. So that's what I'd recommend first, is look at what you can improve in your role, and does that help you feel better in your role? And the second thing that I would encourage you to do is to pay attention to what your gut is telling you. So for example, if you're procrastinating a lot, if you feel a lot of dread when it comes to getting your work done, if you're feeling bored and disconnected and unengaged, those may be signs that your practice management skills are, maybe not exactly where they could be. So that would take us back to that first line of attack, right? We're going to improve on those just to see if it's a job. But if you fix all of that and you're still feeling disengaged, you are still procrastinating, you still feel bored, chances are there's something deeper than having ADHD or having executive functioning challenges. There's something deeper. And so we want to make sure that we give you a chance to explore that, because you might not be in the right role, right? You might not be in the right job. You might not be in the right practice area. You might not be even in the right profession. And so I would encourage you to give yourself permission. I give you permission. I give you permission to give yourself permission to explore opportunities that are outside of what you're doing right now, because it may be that you think that you've gone to law school and you've been practicing in a certain area for a number of years. And so you're established there, you've got connections there, you've got relationships, you've got clients, you've got skills, etc. But if you're not happy, then maybe there's something else that would make you even happier. And going back to where we started, right? This idea of being an explorer, a pioneer, a creator, an architect, the skills that you develop in each of your roles is setting yourself up for a new level of success, whether it's in your existing role, whether it's in a different role. And so this idea that you're missing out, you're losing the benefit of your skills simply isn't true, right? Everything that you've built to this point has just allowed you to reach a new threshold, right? You've reached a new mountaintop. And now you see, wait a minute, there's this whole other world out there, and there's something else that's calling to me. And we want to make sure that you're answering that call, right? We want you to feel connected to your work. We want you to feel engaged with your work. You're going to be working for a long time, right? I mean, unless you're right in your retirement and you think, well, whatever, I'll suck it up for a couple of years. Okay, fine. Or maybe you're working in an organization where you get entitlement to a pension and you've got 3 years to go and you think, well, I can do that for another 3 years and then I'll follow my passion. That's fine. And I'm not saying throw everything away and follow your passion in a way that doesn't align with your other life goals, right? It's all in context. But please do give yourself that permission to explore what might really resonate with you. Because again, if you've been discounting your own internal voice, if you haven't been trusting yourself, there may be that voice inside you that is trying to guide you. And so we need to pay attention to that voice. Now, it can be helpful to have support in this, right? Support from a counselor, support from a coach, a mentor, colleagues, family members, your partner, whoever it is in your life that you want to turn to, who can help support you through what might be a career transition for you. So, my dear friend, I have reached the end of my notes, the end of today's podcast episode. Just to recap what we've talked about here today, we've talked about some of the global strategies that I would encourage you to consider they have been effective in the coaching relationships that I've had, particularly with clients of mine who have ADHD. And those strategies, just to recap, number one is not to expect your career path to be linear. I would say increasingly as we enter the next stages of the legal profession, even things are changing rapidly, right? We had COVID that really disrupted the traditional way of doing things with a lot of positive side benefits, a lot more mobility when it comes to working from home, for example, the way that a number of practice areas have evolved to allow more remote witnesses and very specific things that make the practice of law a little bit more manageable, that increase access to justice for people. I mean, there's all these developments. And now we're seeing with the development of that AI generative technology, that's going to change things as well. And so our practice, this profession will continue to evolve, and you are highly suited to adapt and evolve along with it. So number one is we're not going to expect that linear career path. If that's what you want, great. You can do that too. But don't worry so much about creating that linear path. Number two is to use a mind map. And you can use a mind map for career planning, right? So you just want to take all of your ideas and create a visual, whether that's Post-its, whether it's a drawing, whether it's a Word document, or some other thing, right? Don't let me limit you. Go online, see what you can find. But you just want a way of externalizing all of your ideas so that you can see the relationships, you can figure out what your next steps might be. And then finally, we talked lastly about trusting your gut, trusting your instincts. And so if you've reached a point where maybe you're not giving yourself that level of self-trust, or you're doubting your own intuition, I'm encouraging you to go back to that. And it would be helpful to start, if you're unhappy in your current role, with where you are and to clean things up, right? From a practice management perspective, from a communication boundaries perspective, just to make sure that it's not those things that are getting in your way, that it truly is the job. And then we want you to explore what it is that resonates most with you, what your values are, what really lights you up, and to then find a way to build more of that into your career path. So thank you again for joining me this week. Again, if you didn't catch last week's episode, you might go back to that as well. If this is a topic that interests you and you've now heard more of the macro perspective, that career planning perspective, and you'd like to go back to the micro perspective. And of course, if you have any questions at all, please do reach back and let me know. I would love to hear from you. I would love to support you. I'm so glad to have you here with me this week, and I will very much look forward to reconnecting with you again soon. Bye for now. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. For instructions on how to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com/podcast launch. See you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.